Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for April 27th, 2022. And would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Tigan?
Here.
Member Tom Anderson is absent. Member Shirok is absent. Member Phillips?
Here.
Member Leong? Here. Member Cohen?
Present.
Member Gonzalez?
Here.
Member Brown?
Present.
Member Hoy?
Here.
Member William Anderson?
Here.
Member Nordyke?
Here.
Member Soros?
Present.
Member Varney?
Here.
Member Milton? Member Milton? Absent. Member Bennett?
Here.
Member Vieira Brandel?
Here.
Chair Stapleton?
I'm here.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much. All right. I've asked Member Cohen if we could please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. We do have an addition to the agenda. It's a staff report that was emailed out earlier today. Do I have a motion to approve the additions to the agenda?
I move that we approve the additions to the agenda.
Thank you, Member Varney, and second by Phillips. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed signify by saying no. All right, the motion passes. Thank you. We will begin tonight. We don't have anybody sign up for public testimony in this first section, but we do in the second section for public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and, if it's all right with the group, call Carol Scheiner forward. And if we can just have your testimony now. You have 3 minutes to, I see Josh, you have unmuted.
Sorry, Chair Stapleton. Carol Snyder signed up for the public hearing. So it's actually Jim Shepke.
Okay. I apologize. So do we have it? So we do have one member to sign up here, and that's Jim Shepke. Okay. Jim, you have 3 minutes, and please state your name and your address and let us know how we can help you today.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton and Budget Committee. My name is Jim Shepke. I reside in Ward 2, and I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation about libraries. You're probably not surprised about that. I was sorry to miss your last meeting when you dealt with the library, but I was visiting my 94-year-old mother in Mississippi, so I had a really good excuse. But I did watch your meeting, and you got excellent testimony from the vice chair of the library board. But I just wanted to add to that some information that I think is really important, because I don't think you know and appreciate how underfunded our public library is. I know you talked at your last meeting about all the departments that are underfunded, but the situation with our public library is really dire. And here you see on the screen a table that has all 23 Oregon public libraries that serve populations over 30,000 population, and what their total expenditures were in actually in 2021. And Salem Public Library is at the bottom of the list. We have the worst funded public library in the state, to put it bluntly. Lake Oswego spent more money on their library than we did last year. And Eugene spent, more than twice, and it goes on and on. There's libraries that spend 2, 3, almost 4 times as much as we do on our public library, and it's less than average for these libraries. So it's a very, very bad situation. And I know there's some sharp cookies in the budget committee that are probably now saying, but Jim, our library was in a temporary space last year, and our library was dealing with COVID, and that's why our expenditures were so low. But I can refute that hypothesis by showing you what the situation was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we were in the same place. We were at the bottom of the heap 3 years ago, and this was before we moved into temporary quarters in 2020. So it's no different. It's no different. And this didn't happen overnight. It's been happening, I'd say, over the last 20 years, that we've cut our library again and again and again and again, to where today it's the worst funded public library in the whole state. And if you're the worst funded library in the whole state, it's not surprising that your staffing is that you're understaffed. So here you see that our total staff per capita is at the bottom. Eugene has about twice as many staff per capita as we do. Our librarians.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to have to cut you off there at 3 minutes.
Is that 3 minutes already?
Yes. I'm so sorry.
You know what? I had a revenue idea that I was going to share if somebody wanted to ask me about that.
Okay. Member Nordike, let's see what you got.
You know, it's so weird. For some reason, I've got like this burning question about revenue I've been dying to ask. Mr. Shepke, would you mind enlightening us?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I got to share my screen again.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to tell you about how bad our branch was, only open 8 hours a week, which is terrible. But here's my revenue idea, and you could do this. You could increase the regressive city operations fee for businesses and institutions. I did some public records requests last year, and you know what I found out? I found out that the 6 homes on my street pay $64.80 a month in the city operations fee, and that's more per month than Willamette University, Costco, Walmart on Lancaster, and the Oregon State Capitol. And if that isn't regressive, I don't know what is, because on my street, we don't get a lot of police and fire and other city services. And so I really think if you have an equity lens, you need to get it out and you need to look at this. And these businesses and institutions need to pay many, many more times what they're paying today for the operations fee. And that's my idea that I bring to you today.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to let you, there you go. Any other questions for Mr. Shepke? All right, seeing none. Oh, Vanessa did, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Mr. Shepke, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you here for a second. There are some people in the community who are like, what do we need a public library space for? Can't we just go online and access library resources that way? Why is it so important to have a brick and mortar space with real staff, real people, as opposed to just moving everything online?
Because that serves a very small percentage of people. And I'll tell you who it doesn't serve that are the most important users of public libraries. It's kids. It's kids 0 to 5 and kids in school. And they don't go online and read ebooks and audiobooks, particularly those 0 to 5 kids. They need story time. They need picture books. They need those things desperately. And they're not getting them in West Salem, by the way, because we don't have story time in West Salem. If you want to do one thing in the upcoming fiscal year to improve libraries, you'll add hours to West Salem and you'll restore children's services to West Salem. And that's my answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, my kids need the library too. That's where they go to play Dungeons and Dragons with their friends, which is always a great community place to be. Member or Vice Chair Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Shepke, you mentioned there you're showing your slides in your presentation, you mentioned that on the street that you live, you do not get a lot of public services. What street do you live on, sir?
I live on East Nob Hill Street.
East Nob Hill.
And it's got nice little bungalow houses, and we don't use a lot of city services.
Got it. And you also mentioned that this regression has been going on for over 20 years. And you also mentioned about having an equity lens. Is this a conversation that you have presented year after year to the same group?
I've talked to this group a lot, and I talked to the city a lot, and I've talked to the library board a lot. I was the state librarian of Oregon for 20 years, and I retired about a decade ago. And ever since, I've been an advocate for our Salem Public Library. Not that it's done a lot of good, but I'm not going to stop. And I hope before I leave this mortal coil that the Salem Public Library will be at least average in the state of Oregon. That'd be great.
Thank you for sharing. We appreciate you.
I think you've done a lot, Jim, already, and your continued work is appreciated. I know I appreciate you coming here and sharing this with us. So thank you for coming down. Oh, it looks like Member Anderson has a question.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for coming in each year and talking about this important topic. If you were on the budget committee and you could make a motion to increase funding to the library, what would your motion be?
You know, I know you don't have a lot of money, but it wouldn't cost much to add hours to the West Salem branch library. And I'll tell you, an 8-hour-a-week schedule is almost worthless. You might as well just close it down, because when you think about that, it's 2 afternoons a week from 1 to 4 p.m. So students can't use it. They just are getting out of school at, 3:20 or something. And nobody's really using that library, and they have no services for children. When they first opened, as I think Catherine Daniels testified last week, they were open 35 hours a week, 6 days a week. They had all the children's services, story time, summer reading, you name it. And so that would be my priority. Add something back to West Salem, for heaven's sake. It really needs it.
Thank you. That was a really great question. I appreciate that. Thank you, Jim, for coming down. Appreciate it. We have also, just to clarify before I move on, Mr. Eggleston, do we have anybody else signed up?
No, not for this portion.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, we also received some written correspondence, and those are listed under item 2 from the agenda. And let me see here. Our next order of business is to approve the April 20th, 2022 Budget Committee minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes from the April 20th, 2022 meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
Great, second by Phillips. Is there any discussion at all? Okay, seeing none, please signify by in favor by signifying by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, signify by saying no. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Next, we will move on to an action item. Tonight, we have an error before us, we need to approve this correction that Josh is bringing forward. So Josh, can you walk us through this and how this is part of our agenda tonight?
Yes, thank you, Chair Stapleton. As a reminder, an errata sheet, an errata in Latin, it is error, is used to identify and correct any errors found in the budget or budget document that are inaccurate or could cause confusion. In this case, the budget display in the Urban Renewal Agency budget book for the Riverfront Downtown URA capital projects. The correction would reallocate $50,000 from funding committed to future projects to the Court Street one-way, two-way conversion project and segregate phase 4 of the streetscape project from phases 1 through 3. These can be found on pages 47 and 48 of the URA budget document, and the corrected pages have been included as part of your agenda this evening. There's no budget impact to this change. It's just the display with the projects. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Josh and I shared some fun emails about the word errata, an error. Common language, right? All right, may I have a motion to approve the errata sheet 1?
So moved. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bennett. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Phillips. Is there any discussion at all? Great, thank you. All right, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed signify by saying no. All right, motion passes. All right, Budget Officer Eggleston, could you review the information items and handouts for us for this evening?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. There are 3 information items for you this evening. The first is a summary of your actions, request for information, and testimony from the April 20th meeting last week. The second and third items are summaries of the Budget Committee questions and the answers from staff. I appreciate the thoughtful questions and the opportunity to answer them ahead of your meeting. I also want to thank department staff for their assistance in getting the answers back to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a lot of great questions that were asked. And I really appreciated the time and effort staff took to answer all of those really thoroughly. Are there any other questions for staff regarding the summary or previous actions at this time? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Our next item on the agenda is to conduct a public hearing. This is going to be my first, so wish me luck. On the proposed capital improvements plan for fiscal years 2023 through 2027. The public hearing is now open. Does the budget officer have a presentation for us?
Just real quick, it looks like you have a question from Member Nordyke.
Oh, sorry about that. Member Nordyke.
Sure, and I apologize for speaking out of turn. When it comes to the capital improvement plan, I follow a practice of declaring a potential conflict of interest because capital improvements could potentially impact me and my family and our property holdings in the city of Salem. So in an abundance of caution, I declare that every year. So I'll be following that practice again this year.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Mr. Eggleston, do you have a presentation for us today? Or
Actually, I'm going to turn it over to James Wharton Hess. He's a management analyst too in the budget office, and he'll be doing the CIP public hearing and presentation.
Great, thank you so much.
Chair Stapleton, members of the committee, my name is James Wharton Hess. I'm a management analyst in the budget office, and I'm going to present the CIP for fiscal years 2023 through 2027. A capital improvement plan, or CIP, is a 5-year plan for capital spending. Like a budget, the CIP matches expected revenues with planned expenditures. But unlike a budget, the CIP has a multi-year timeline, which is helpful when planning large expenditures for projects that may span multiple years. Preparation of the CIP is governed by Council Policy C9. In addition, ORS Chapters 223 requires that projects financed by system development charges be part of an adopted financial plan, and the CIP can be used to fulfill that requirement. CIP projects are identified in multiple ways, including via infrastructure assessments, planning processes, plan documents, and updates. For urban renewal, master plan updates, strategic action plans, and advisory board meetings provide guidance and direction for included projects. The city's various infrastructure plans, such as the Transportation Master Plan and the Parks Systems Master Plan, are also important to the process and contribute to CIP development. In terms of public outreach, the CIP is noticed to the public in several ways, and often the projects that are included in the CIP are part of a master plan or other process that includes outreach to neighborhood associations or advisory boards. The CIP webpage includes information about CIP development processes, as well as prior year CIP documents. The website includes a project request form that allows residents to submit projects to be considered for the CIP. These request forms are available year-round and can be submitted at any time. That website also contains information to help display individual projects. The GIS team, which includes personnel from IT and Public Works, has updated the interactive CIP projects map to help give a visual representation of the projects by type and location. Users can click on the project icons and the project detail will appear in a pop-up box. Each year, a public hearing is held to receive feedback on the plan, and the public hearing is noticed through weekly emailed Salem Community Connection and the city's website. So a little bit about the development process. The city development process is a key element of the city's overall capital planning effort. The CIP itself is primarily a planning document that contains projects where likely funding sources have been identified, have a cost of $50,000 or more, and includes new projects or new funding sources. Projects that have been identified but do not have an identified funding source remain outside of the CIP until those resources can be identified. So as the process moves forward, the year one CIP projects flow into the proposed budget, and previously funded and carryover projects contained in the current 2022 budget will also flow into that 2023 budget. The budget will then include all year one CIP projects, as well as carryover projects, projects adopted mid-year, reappropriations, administrative costs, and all smaller capital projects that do not meet that $50,000 CIP threshold. So the majority of the CIP document is made up of these individual project detail sections, like the example on the slide. In the top left-hand corner, you're going to have the project number. Under that, you're going to see the category, and then the neighborhood association or neighborhood associations that the project is occurring in, followed by the title. And then up there in the top right-hand corner, if the project was given a score, that will be located up there, followed by the ward or wards that the project is in. The second half of that page has the funding source by year, and then lined out each funding source, or sources in this case. And then on the bottom is the CIP total for each year, just for the term of the CIP. And then below that is the amounts funded in prior years. So when you add those two together, you get the total estimated project cost, and then there's a short description of each project on those sheets. So I wanted to highlight a couple projects in this year's CIP. The Commercial Street Southeast Buffered Bike Lanes project is planned to enter construction phase in fiscal year 2023, and that includes buffered bike lanes and pedestrian crossing improvements beginning at Oxford Street Southeast. While the southerly project limits have shifted to Madrona Avenue Southeast due to inflationary costs, the buffered bike lanes, along with a new bike signal south of Alice Avenue Southeast and a pedestrian crossing with flashing beacons at Triangle Drive Southeast, will improve safety for bicyclists and pedestrians along the corridor. The project includes federal grant funding administered by the Oregon Department of Transportation, along with match funding from the city's 2008 Streets and Bridges Bond. The second project I want to highlight is the Darien Island Filter Number 2 Reconstruction project. This project is expected to wrap up in fiscal year 2024 and includes design and reconstruction of the roughing filter number 2 at Darien Island. The project will line the bottom of the filter, replace piping, and install a new influent and effluent structure. $20 million in state funding has been contributed to this project. So a quick overview of the CIP is listed here. $278,300,070 will be spent over the 5 years. That's about 154 individual CIP projects, spanning 19 separate funding sources and 11 separate categories of infrastructure. The CIP document includes a display of the projects by result area as well. Projects are attributed to 4 of the 6 total results areas, and more detail on that is available on page 10 of your CIP document. The chart on the screen highlights the funding sources. So the largest funding source is utility rates, followed by the Urban Renewal Agency. That all others category includes utility and transportation SDCs, donations, lodging tax, and streetlight rates, among other things. This chart shows CIP funding by the 4 major project groups. The utility and transportation projects make up the majority of the CIP, followed by smaller portions for community and municipal facilities. So here's a look at projects by category. The first group is community facilities at about $18.7 million over the 5 years. That's made up of historic structures and parks, and parks is the vast majority of that spending. Municipal facilities totals $31.3 million over the 5 years, and that's made up of 4 categories, including airport, buildings, information technology, and parking structures. Transportation totals $110 million over the 5-year period, and it's made of 2 categories, that's streetlights and streets. Again, streets is the vast majority of that spending. And then finally, there's utility, which is $118.8 million over the 5 years, and that's made up of 3 categories: stormwater, wastewater, and water. So that concludes the staff presentation for the proposed capital improvement plan. Representatives from the city departments are available to answer any questions after public comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really great. All right, so now we have public testimony from Carol Scheiner. Carol, are you here? Great. All right, thank you, Carol. You have 3 minutes, and please state your name and address.
Okay, I'm Carol Snyder, the president of Salem Parks Foundation, and I live in Ward 2. And I'm here tonight to ask that you approve the recommendation by the Public Works Department to fund the CIP for the restoration of the Eco Earth Globe in Riverfront Park. It's project number 1339. We hope that you agree that we cannot allow the Eco Earth Globe to continue to deteriorate and be a blight on one of our premier parks. In 2020, the City Council authorized a study to establish an estimate of the cost of restoration. Architectural Resources Group was hired, and they determined that the cost would be about $400,000. $112,000 of that included city staff time and resources. Salem Parks Foundation has offered to raise $300,000 if the city agrees to provide the staff time necessary to shepherd the process. So the budget request is for $112,000 using the lodging tax as its funding source. Going on faith that the city would not pass up this offer of financial help, Salem Parks Foundation began its fundraising effort in November. It's been a low-key effort so far, but we have garnered over $35,000 in donations from local citizens. But now we'd like to up our game and approach businesses and grant-giving foundations. So I cannot stress enough how important it is that we get a firm commitment from the city to fund the staff time needed to restore Eco Earth, and as the beautiful mosaic sculpture it once was, and a grand example of Salem's community spirit. We've heard from a few cynics that Eco Earth is symbolic of the real world because it's falling apart. And we think that the restoration project can be seen as symbolic too. A damaged world can be restored if enough caring people step up to help. And your approval of the CIP will help us reach those caring people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Carol. Member Hoy.
Thank you. I just have a quick question for staff. If we're just looking for staff time, is this really a CIP?
I'll be happy to answer that, Councilor Hoy. It's Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director. It is a project. It's big enough to be a capital project. Staff time when they are managing the project is included in the CIP expenses, so that's why it is listed here. And then it's in year 1, so once approved and the capital budget is approved, it'll drop into the capital construction budget and then await the success of the Salem Parks Foundation.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've all been charged, right? Director Fernandez has all charged us with donating our well-earned money to a well-earned cause. Anybody else have any question for Carol? Okay, thank you so much, Carol, for coming down and providing really great public comment.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak to this CIP process? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and close the public hearing. And we will then ask any questions or discussions from the committee to staff. Member Phillips.
Yeah, I just thought of this question. So I serve on SCATS, and we got some funding for like the Hillficker commercial intersection. That was, I think, federal funds. So how does that affect the CIP when we have additional funds come in? Does it bump up other projects if we get more funding than we had to start with?
So it really depends, Councilor Phillips. If we have, and I'm looking for that. Oh, thank you. Somebody just whispered in my ear where the project is. So that project, that Hillficker Lane, and we're looking at project 616 at the top of page 45, if you're following along at home. If that's the money, that $1.1 million in federal highway money, The other source of funds there is transportation SDCs. So if more money has come in for that and the other funding source is transportation SDCs, then clearly less SDCs would be spent, and then those monies would be available for other SDC eligible projects.
Okay, thank you.
I'm surprised by the lack of questions, guys, or everybody, pardon me. Member Varney.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. My questions are in regard to scoring. I think I kind of found the answer about why some projects are scored and some aren't, but I'd like a little more information on that. That's one thing. And then I was wondering if the same criteria for scoring is used from year to year. And since we're looking at a 5-year plan, does it stay the same criteria throughout that? I mean, has it been in place for a long time? Let's put it that way.
You're muted, Peter.
Thank you, Josh. This late in the COVID game, and I'm still muted. So Councilor Varney, thank you. I think I'll ask City Engineer Brian Martin to talk a little bit about the scoring process and the categories and how that works.
Emergency projects usually scored.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Brian Martin, City Engineer. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the bulk of all the projects in the CIP are scored. There are some programs that typically wouldn't be scored if we have funds for, say, just design and analysis for a particular category. Those things don't get scored. Sometimes when we have emergency projects that show up and we have to do something right away, those don't get scored. But otherwise, the bulk of all the projects in the CIP are scored. And the different categories of projects have slightly different scoring systems. They cover similar categories, but there are little nuances to them. As far as how they compare over the 5 years, when we look at the scores for each year, we're looking at all the scores in that category. So they would be under the same. So for example, if it was a wastewater project, whether it was in year 1 or year 5, it scored against the same criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Member Source?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. My question, $278 million is a lot of money. And we got one public comment today in front of this committee. So I just want to ask the question, how are we seeking public feedback? And how involved are members of the public throughout this process? And that's staff in general. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize for speaking over you, Member Source. Thank you for the question. I'm actually not surprised and in some ways delighted that there aren't a lot of comments here. The annual CIP public hearing to this point is really the culmination of year-round work. Tammy Stars, who is our CIP coordinator, goes out to all the neighborhood associations to speak to them throughout the year. We also take information from people throughout the year. CIP website, there's the form that you can fill out information, and it's really taken us a lot of years to get to this point where the community understands that they can come to us year round and work on these issues so that by this point we're set. It's a financial planning tool, not a ask for projects. That part is throughout the year, and we've really have told the community and worked hard to let the community know that throughout the year we can have these conversations and then find the money to put in the CIP so that when we get here, we can have something like what Carol Snyder did, is simply say, hey, yeah, the project's in there, make sure to vote for it. So, because we've had those conversations with her and with the Parks Foundation months ago. So in some ways, I'm delighted that people aren't here because we've done our job, I hope.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. In regards to buildings, is there a move at all to go away from natural gas HVAC systems and go towards more efficient electric heat pumps? And then also with doing roofs, is there thought about going away from asphalt, shingles, I think that's what it's called, or some sort of shingles, to something more environmentally practical.
Jim Schmidt is here. Good. Jim.
Yes, Jim Schmidt, Fleet Facilities Manager. Thank you for the question. At this time, we are not looking we're always looking for new energy sources, but as right now, the natural gas is a more efficient fuel source that we're using. As far as roofing, we're looking at different sources for that as well. I know Mr. Martin's on here, the new roof for the new public ops building and the library and the public police station were all non-asphaltic roof materials.
Yes, that's correct. And the operations building, which is under construction now, we're actually going to be using all electricity and some solar power for that building.
Great, that's exciting news. Glad to hear it. Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. I had a few parks capital improvement questions, so if city staff can queue up the appropriate staff member. In page 192 of my big fat budget book, there is a line item for Minto Brown Island Park parking lot rehabilitation. It shows $110,000 in general funds being allocated towards the design and construction to rehabilitate the parking lots. I asked about this project because it's a park in my ward, and I've had a number of residents, whether they call Ward 7 their home or not, a lot of people use Minto Brown. A lot of people rely on the parking. And I've heard a lot of questions about why doesn't the city just pave the parking lot for the off-leash dog area? So my first question is the 110 simply to fill potholes, spread bark chips and stuff like that? Or are we allocating funds to pave the off-leash parking lot?
I could go ahead and answer that, Councilor Nordyke. The goal was really to find funds for paving the off-leash dog parking lot. The cost is much more than $110,000. That's about all we could pull together. So it's kind of a placeholder until we can either collect all those funds through the general fund over time, or we also have it as a proposed project in the 2022 bond proposal. In that case, it would be fully funded. So if we're fortunate enough to pass a bond, that $110,000 would no longer be needed in the CIP for that project.
Okay, so basically this is a placeholder for potentially paving that parking lot depending on the outcome of the vote in November?
That's correct. We would, it is still short funding. With our parks project, we try to put money in over time to get there. If the bond doesn't pass, we'd be short about probably $500,000 or so to get it done.
Thank you. All right. My next question is on the next page, 193 of our big budget book. This is the Skyline Trail connection, Sprague High School to Joplin Court South, another trail in my ward. This is a very beloved trail. A lot of folks really enjoy using it. It's one of the only forested trails in the city, along with Croson Creek or Croson Trail. For those who haven't found the page in your budget book, I'll just read the 3 sentences. It sets aside $150,000 in SDC fees for design and construction of 40 linear feet of recreational trail, et cetera, et cetera. So really my question is, the design and construction of 40 linear feet, is the intention to keep this still an unpaved footpath? I'm just kind of curious what exactly you anticipate doing with that. How will that trail look differently after these funds, in other words?
Right. It would be planned to still be a unpaved footpath. However, I think the connection we're making is more direct. There's some concerns with how it connects in that area. I also know the school district is looking at doing some revisions to their trail also on their part of the property. So it's partially work that we would propose and then partially work that the school district would do.
Okay. And then last but not least, moving forward to page 203, the Navigation Center. I just had a general question about that. Council earlier this year voted to accept grant funding from Marion County and the state of Oregon. Thank you, Marion County. Thank you, state of Oregon, for $4.9 million in tenant improvements of our navigation center. And for my budget committee members who may not be familiar with this building has been a dream of council and staff and our community partners for years. And we finally have the funds. Not only have we bought the building, but we needed to make extensive renovations. But yeah, 4.9 million is a lot of money. I'm just wondering if the staff can just paint in broad strokes. What is that money? Why do we need 4.9 million to rehabilitate this building? And how will this building look differently?
I'll let someone else answer the second part of the question, but just to clarify the first part, we haven't received the grant agreements yet from Marion County and the state. So we'll come back to council for that approval, and then we'll get those funds. So just to be clear, we don't have those funds yet. So it's kind of waiting on that piece until we can start the project, just to make.
But I'm pretty sure they will. And if they don't, they'll hear from me. Sorry, go on.
Good evening, Kristen Rutherford, the manager. Oh, Brian, do you have, if you would like to answer this one, please jump right in there.
Okay, sure, absolutely. That building needs a full gut out. So it's really all the interiors getting, for the most part, removed. We got to put a new kitchen in, new sleeping quarters. All the facilities are basically going to be brand new inside that building. So we're going to have the shell, but basically the whole interior is going to be completely renovated. So it's a pretty expensive project.
And it's what I had heard was that the royal we, because I know we're working with Community Action Agency, I think the intention is to provide perhaps on-site health services, medical and or mental health. Is there a plan to have like more of a confidential meeting space for those sorts of services?
Yes, there will be. There will be separate offices for those services.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. Yeah, I really hope to see that come to fruition in the coming months. It's going to be really amazing for our community to have that asset. And I really hope that we can have some RV amenities there. I know I've talked to staff about having a dumping station and a water filling station there for folks who are living in their RVs. It's not something that we have a lot of access to here in Salem. So let's see, Member Phillips.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Stapleton. So it might be a more sophisticated way to ask more conceptually, similar to my first question. So with the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed into law at the federal level, where are we at in terms of like getting those funds as a community? Is this like have some of that, most of that, or are we still going to receive that and update this over time?
So Councilor Phillips, on the infrastructure side, we received about $960,000 right away from SCATS, and that money's been allocated to mostly pedestrian and neighborhood projects. There's two different projects in the CIP that call out those dollars. We have not seen a whole lot of money coming through on the transportation side. The difficulty on really for any federal funding is that you need to have a federally permitted project, and the only project that we have that's ready for construction is McGilchrist with all of its proper permits. Everything else would need to be updated or re-permitted, and we haven't. If we had any federal funds coming, we would want to apply them to McGilchrist first. On the water, sewer, stormwater infrastructure side, we have not seen anything yet that has come through. I personally have reviewed the list. There's a lot of special kinds of projects, and I want to use the term special interest. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a specialty kind of way that a lot of funds are allocated for. Nevertheless, we are going to retain the services of a consultant that specializes in these kinds of things to help us look for these funds, but there's nothing in the beyond the $1 million from SCATS. There's nothing in the CIP at this point for that kind of for those funds.
Thank you.
Yes, I learned about this at a recent conference, and they gave us the website of build.gov, and it's fascinating to go there and scroll through the 300 and some odd pages of proposed money for different projects. It's really quite exciting to see the infusion of cash into our communities across all of the states here. Member Tigan, I see you, but I'm going to ask for Member Vera Brandel, who, there you are. I saw your hand up for a while. I apologize for missing you.
No worries. Thank you. I had a couple of questions. One, I was curious how equity, social and geographic equity is defined within the scoring criteria.
I could go ahead and answer that question also. There's multiple categories when we score a CIP project. There's one category for equity, and I forgot the exact percentage. It ends up being about 10% of the project score is based on equity. And when we look at that equity lenses, we look at them a little bit differently for the different categories of projects. For example, for transportation projects, SCATS has put out different population scenarios and how the different different components are scored based on the different demographics across the community. And so we apply 8 different layers on transportation projects, looking at all different age groups and how folks are affected. Parks is a little bit different. There's a different map that we use for that one. So we look at it from a demographic perspective there. And then we also look at the need in underserved communities based on, locations of where the parks are at versus how many people can get to them and what type of disadvantaged individuals are located from them. So they're similar in some ways, but a little bit different, but all those projects are scored with an equity lens that averages about 10% of the total CIP score.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's possible, and it may be more information than I need, but I get into the weeds sometimes. If it's possible to see the scoring criteria or see an example of how something gets scored.
I don't have that available to share on my computer. I could certainly follow up with something tomorrow if that would meet your needs.
Yeah, that would be great. Even if I can shoot that over to Josh as well as a question to get answered between now and the next meeting.
Okay.
I think the best thing would be for us to provide it to Josh so that all of the members can get the information, with the next agenda packet next week.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that will be fascinating to see.
And Councilor Stapleton, if I may, just real quick, because we've referred to SCATS a couple of times, and it's a little jargony, so I just want to just throw this out. That's an acronym for the Salem Kaiser Area Transportation Study, and that is a federally designated entity. It's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's a regional agency made up of, they have their own staff, but the policy committee is a member, one representative from the city of Salem, the city of Kaiser, Marion and Polk counties, the school district, and the Oregon Department of Transportation. And that is a federal designation that allows federal transportation dollars that are destined for the local community. It stops there first, and then it is allocated from there. So it gives a local voice to federal transportation dollars that otherwise would just, ODOT would just make, Oregon Department of Transportation would just make the decision. So when we refer to SCATS, that's strictly a federal transportation funding. For our purposes, it's an agency that's what they do, and we have a vote in that.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification and explanation for those who are watching. Transit is also on that board, yes? Okay, great.
That is correct. Right. I knew I was missing one.
There's a lot of people there, and they're really doing some good work. So, Member Tigan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually had one more question.
Oh, so sorry. Yes, go ahead.
And this may be a better question to have y'all look into and get back to us on. I was just curious if there's information available on how much park space or park land, potential park land, is available in each ward, and what percentage of that is being used.
If I may, what do you mean by used? You mean acreage developed?
Yes.
Okay, so total acreage of parks properties, and then how much of that is developed and spread out by ward. We have that information. We can provide that next week.
And I think even beyond what is already owned, potential, also thinking like where there's opportunity to expand or acquire new land for parks.
Yeah, so what we'll probably do is on that one is we'll refer to the Park System Master Plan, but we'll provide either a page reference or we'll provide the map or maps that have that.
Great, thank you. All right, Member Tigan.
Thank you. I had a couple questions about in the big book, Director Fernandez, on page 189 is kind of the overall snapshot of the project expenditure summary. And I guess I want to understand what it looks like is sort of a growing budget of capital expenditures. And then you kind of look at it year by year, and well, the police facility is really big in one year and the shops facility is really big in another year. And so I guess I kind of just want to know how you think about it, or how the city staff thinks about that total bottom line, because I can understand each individual project, but I also see just sort of this growing trend of from 2020 going from $73 million in projects being funded in that year one to now we're up to twice that, $150 million in 4 years. And also, like, I assumed there was some bipartisan infrastructure bill money in this year one, and to hear that none of that federal funding is represented here, or if it is, it's in McGilchrist. I don't know. How should we feel about like watching this line double over the course of 4 years? Is it just the nature of your business?
I think you should feel great about it. I mean, here we are, a small community making tremendous investments in our infrastructure. So we're blessed. I mean, there's a lot of communities our size that would give their right arm and a part of their left leg to have this kind of funding to improve their infrastructure. And the funny thing is as big as this is, we still need a lot more. The needs really are endless. So that's a little glib. So I'll get into some detail. It's really volatile. The more professional answer is that it's really volatile from year to year. For example, if the bond passes, then you'll see this thing skyrocket for a while. So from year to year, there may be, the police. You yourself mentioned the police facility. So all of a sudden, in 1 year, the bond passed. There was $60 million, and then that was spent down. The library passed, so there was another 20 million, and then that was spent down. So there's just a variety of things, and we could just kind of flip through of monies that come in and the projects are done and they go out. So these monies are not unlike programmatic dollars where you might think, oh wow, the programs are growing, or is there bloat or some kind of issue like that. In the capital budget, it really is that there's funding available, funding has come to bear, and we're building projects. So it really is good news. But it is volatile. It can go up and it can go down depending. If the bond doesn't pass, we'll spend down these dollars, and then you'll see smaller numbers in the years to come, unless other sources come to fruition.
So just to follow up, this fiscal year 23 proposal in front of us, it doesn't include anything on the bond, and the CIP itself from 23 to 27 doesn't include the bonded projects either.
No, there are some things in the CIP that are hopes. For example, I was looking through it today, and there is, for example, some federal funding for McGilchrist out in year 3, because we're going to apply for federal money. So there's $11 million sitting there that is a hope. So, but that's sitting out in year 3 of the CIP. In the capital construction budget in page 189, those are real dollars that are in there. And yeah, we just have, it's good news. I mean, I really just see it that way. It's, you know, the sort of, you know, we're in pins and needles is, man, we have to deliver all these projects, you know, so the engineering staff is, you know, on edge, but no, it's really good news for the community.
That's great. Thank you.
The one other thing I would add just real quick, a lot of the funding that you see in that year, the first year, it's restricted funding. So it's a lot of utility projects, a lot of transportation SDCs, a lot of grant funding. You know, there's not a lot of general fund projects. There's not a lot of geo bond projects. So it's because that funding is available that we're able to do the projects. It's not like there's a big pot of money we can move around to other projects. They're very specific to those projects that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Source, I did see your hand up. Do you have a question? Great.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Stapleton. I know this is going to be kind of an unpopular question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. One of the things I hear from members of the community all the time is their frustration about SDCs from development in their community, not going to development or not going to park or infrastructure projects in their community, getting it dispersed across the city. And I wanted to know if you have any information about SDCs, percentages of where the development is going based on how much of the funds are actually being spent in said communities. Because I hear all the time from my friends and family about concerns that they face development in West Salem or South Salem, for example, and but they're not seeing new infrastructure, new parks, new anything coming from those SDCs. And I want to make sure that we, if we can, kind of dispel some of those misconceptions if possible.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So let's start with the acronyms, right? So SDCs are systems development charges. Systems development charges are fees assessed to development, to new construction, for the exclusive use of building infrastructure projects that the need for additional infrastructure that is caused by that development. Okay, and that's the state law, and that's been tested in court for many years. So they're not available for just any kind of project. They're not available for operations. They're not available for maintenance. So in fact, there is, as part of the SDC methodology, there is a list of projects. We call it the 309 list because it refers back to the state law that requires that list. And so projects are from that list. The majority of the projects, by their very nature, are in areas that are experiencing growth. So the project list is mostly for, especially in the transportation, water, sewer, storm arenas. The majority are, you know, in the south, in the east, in the west, you know, along the edges of town, where the majority of the development is going on. And then for parks, we did change the methodology, so we do have the ability to spend on parks throughout the community. So that SDC money is being distributed a little bit to other parts, but again, it has to meet the criteria. It has to be in the list. The list is available. If you go on the website and you just type in SDCs, you can find the information. The majority of the money, SDCs come in dribs and drabs. So a lot of the money is then allocated back to projects that developers do. So you'll see a subdivision comes in, all of the local streets inside the subdivision, the developer has to construct. But if they have to construct regional roadways outside of the subdivision that connects, then those are SDC eligible. And so what the community will see is they might see a new signal, they might see a widening of a street near the subdivision, and the developer is building that, and that developer is then entitled to those monies back. And so a lot of the money is allocated directly back to that. And so you know, our friends and family don't see the water, sewer, and storm, but that's in there as well. For parks, we have been building parks, and there is SDC money allocated to parks. The problem that we have with parks is we have very limited staff, and so Mr. Shepke made the argument about libraries. I could borrow his slides and make the argument for parks as well. And so we've been very careful, we've been very circumspect about proposing a lot of new park development because we just don't have a lot of resources to maintain a lot of new acreage. So there is a little bit of acreage. There's a lot of property acquisition with respect to parks. So if you look around, there's a lot more land that we've acquired, but we have to go slowly in terms of park development. So I hope that I've given you enough there.
Yeah, can I follow up real quick?
Please.
Thank you. So when you mean the lack of staff for development of parks, that's just maintaining the park, making sure it's safe, making sure the grass is mowed, et cetera, and if there's like a wasp nest, you're taking care of it, those kind of things. Okay.
Right. And I don't know if I said for maintaining the park once it's developed.
Right.
Yeah, and I know there's actually frustration from the development community because they're paying into the SDCs and they're saying, hey, where are the parks that we're paying? And so we're doing a lot of master plans. We're doing a lot of acquisition. We've worked over the years to sort of, get the parks into shape where perhaps people can use the property with a trail, or we can put some picnic facilities out there. We can mow a small part of it, but fully developed parks, we're really, teetering on. We just can't develop a whole lot more acreage given the staff that we have.
Thank you.
Great question. Member Verney.
Thank you. My question is related to what Member Source was asking about, because we can use SDCs for the development after we have the master plans for each park. So I was just wondering, how is it determined which parks that have master plans in place, which parks get the funding first? How is that determined? Because I didn't see that on the 309 list, and I've looked through the parks master planning document, the comprehensive planning document, and I just don't see anything that determines when a particular park gets developed after its master planning process is over.
Yeah, Councilor, I think we'll want to bring some of that information back to you next week. It has a lot to do with are there other funds available? Are we, is there a need at a certain location that's really calling out for an area that has more need than others? But I don't have at my fingertips that decision making, so I'd want to bring that back to you so that I'm not making stuff up here.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'll take a moment here to share some of my thoughts after reviewing this. And I think a lot of my concerns or my thought processes are shared by others in separate questions that we've had tonight. And my thought process kind of goes along the lines of the fact that the CIP is a very technical document. It is full of, really kind of detailed plans that a select few people really fully understand. And, by the time that it starts off with all of this, interaction that you were talking about, Director Fernandez, about open houses and neighborhood meetings and creating these plans and all of the public outreach. But then the funding has to come along. And sometimes that can take 5+ years. And things can change during that time. Council priorities can change during that time. And I think when I talk to folks who are frustrated with the CIP process, what I hear from them is just a lot of the same. We get all excited about a project and then they feel like it languishes. And I think that's the wrong word to use. It's not languishing. It's really, we're actively doing things to get funding for these projects. But then I feel like they feel left out of the process when it comes back, when it comes time to have it come to fruition. And I wonder what staff or director, if you have any thoughts on this, about the use, how are we communicating with folks and keeping folks updated on the status of projects as they are coming along? And then also, how do we and how do you adjust to changing council policies? You know, I'm thinking about DEI initiatives. I'm thinking about climate change initiatives. How are those coming into play in this 5-year, multi-year process? How is that taken into consideration?
Yeah, Councilor, projects in many cases, sometimes we get a weird one and there's a planning phase and a public involvement phase, and the money magically develops very quickly and we get it built and it's lands in year 1 of the CIP and we're constructing it the next year and it's great. The reality is most projects take years, and we are very good at involving the public and involving residents in the planning phases. And then again in the design and construction phases, but there is that middle part, and I think languishing is a good word, where sometimes projects will take years to find funding, and staff is actively looking for funding, whether it's at SCATs or whether it's grants. But the reality is that to really build a lot of projects, you need something like the bond issue. That will be before the voters in November to move a big amount of projects forward. So there really isn't, people that are interested we keep them informed, and at neighbor associations, or if there's groups or those kinds of things, we certainly speak to people and let them know that things are coming. But a lot of times we're just waiting, and it's not that if the right grant program doesn't come along, or if a project isn't SDC eligible, or it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And one example is that I'll use is McGilchrist. I've been with the city 27 years, and in the first 30 days that I was here, the city traffic engineer drove me out to McGilchrist, and we stopped there, and he pointed out, he says, "This thing, we need to fix this thing within the next 6 months because it will not hold." And 27 years later, it is still sitting there. So that is a prime example of that. The mayor loves to tell the story of he wants a two-way state and court, and he's been at it for decades, and we finally got a piece of state, and then court is in the budget to do pieces of it. So things come along, but they do take a long time. We try to keep people informed, but there can be frustration. We feel the frustration as well.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll take some more time here. I think a good example of that is the Union Street project, and just even still feeling the tensions of that with the supply chain issues that we're having now. So the project can't go forward until next year. Hopefully, I should knock on something. But again, we had plans, and then we had an open house, and I felt like that was the opportunity for the community to re-engage with the project and share either changes of thought or process. And I think staff responded well, and we saved some trees and those things that were important to us. So I guess what I'm saying to the public right now is really stay alert to those open houses, because that is the time to re-engage with a project that the community has asked for, and update it, right, with the freshest, latest technology and needs that the community has. So stay engaged with that, and then hopefully supply chain issues can get fixed and we can get that family-friendly bikeway. Member Tigan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hesitate to ask about parks in that I just have an observation and maybe a question to make on page 13 of the CIP, just this kind of opening spreadsheet about how the parks are funded, the park improvements. And I hesitate to ask it because I know, a lot of what is in the CIP is not necessarily immediately visible to our public. And I think about 2 projects in West Salem, the 22-inch pipe across the Center Street Bridge, which is, of course, very, very important to people who live in West Salem, and the $23 million wastewater pump project. People are never going to see those things, but boy, if they weren't there, I think that gets to what you were saying earlier, Director Fernandez, about how important so much of the CIP is. But I do think that people want to know that the city is improving, like you said, throughout the entire city. And when I look at the park projects by funding source for fiscal year 23, I know that there's over $5 million in improvement happening through the system development charges. And it's heartening to know that it can be spread a little bit more, and it's not just happening in South and West and places where the development is. I will just acknowledge it's a little bit heartbreaking that there's more money being given to the city in donations to work on parks projects than the city is budgeting out of its general fund. And I know, and everyone on this call knows, that there's not money in the general fund to spend on this stuff. But, I guess I just want to acknowledge people's generosity and also wish we could do better than that. And part of it is, some like the neighborhood association I'm a part of, Grant, we have one park in Grant. And when that park was built, I don't think there were system development charges. I don't think anyone paid a system development charge to build my house in 1926. And I'm pretty sure that's when the fence was installed at Grant. And it looks it. It's kind of like one of my pet projects, right? But to people who are listening, like Chair Stapleton said, participate in the CIP process. We'll do the same in our neighborhood associations. But I think we should be striving to improve the look of the city and not just the wastewater, but I understand the tension of why we have the money to do wastewater and we don't have the money necessarily to do rusted fences.
I really like that train of thought. That was really great. Thanks, Paul. Does anybody else? Oh, here we go. Member Anderson.
Hi, so I've been in Salem since around 2003, and I'm curious as to, can you go into a little detail as to how you're doing the community outreach? Because other than being on the budget committee, I've never heard of the CIP or a town hall or any sort of public meeting about it. So I'm just curious if I just live in a neighborhood that has less active people and therefore we don't have very many of those meetings.
Yeah, so our CIP coordinator, who may be on the call, and if she wants to jump in, she's certainly welcome to. But there are certainly meetings with neighborhood associations. There are meetings with groups that are active in moving a project along. Like the Winter Maple Bike Lane was really a community effort that was moved along by a group of people. So they would be involved. We certainly talk about projects if, we're updating the, I know this will be exciting to everyone. We're updating the wastewater collection master plan. And we will, there will be much outreach about our sewer pipes and where they go and how they're going to be improved over the next 20 years. So we provide, those opportunities, and really anybody who calls us and wants to be involved. But you're right, Member Anderson. If you're not participating in a neighborhood association, or I guess there's some outreach. I'm getting whispered in my ear. Some outreach, a lot of outreach to social media. But if you're not participating in those things or looking out for those things, yeah, you may not be as aware. We always invite people to call us. We go out to groups like Rotary and Lions and fraternal orders call us from time to time, and we're happy to come out and visit, or at schools or wherever. So we're always happy to visit with people and let them know what's going on. But these things do take time, and the funding is especially difficult. So I appreciate everyone's comments, and we're here to have the conversations.
Yeah, it was a great question. I think this is another outcome of our individualistic society that we live in now, and really the collapse of community groups and that kind of civic participation. We've all kind of we've all just kind of gone home and looked online and stayed online and not reached out and acted in groups with people and participated. I think that this lends itself well to the general feeling at council of just, we have to become better communicators of what all the city is doing to our citizens, because we're doing a lot of really good work, and somehow it's just not getting out there to folks. And so finding better ways and staying up on that, just the general education of what a city does, right? How many times have we had somebody come to a meeting and complain to us about something that the school board would be in charge of, or something that the county would be in charge of? And so just a general lack of civics in schools. There's so many ways that we could improve our society as a whole. And I'm really committed to seeing that through the way that I can affect change here at council. Member Phillips?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. This is more of a comment. So in looking at the CIP in 2020, 2021, and 2022, it's $300 million. And we're talking about how there are things that we couldn't get to that we'd like to get to. So for me, this highlights the importance of passing the capital bond that'll be coming later this year. I mean, these are projects that we know that we need, and if we don't get them, they will blow a further hole in our operational general fund budget if we don't get that. So just the community needs to understand the scale of like what is needed to take care of the infrastructure we have here in Salem. So I was doing the math, and $300 million of CIP projects in 3 years, starts to put that in better perspective for me.
Yeah, we're going to have to be those cheerleaders for that bond, and Member Phillips. All of us on council here. It'll be our job. Really great questions tonight. I'll give it just another moment to see if any hands come up. Member Tigan.
Sorry, I'll ask one more question. I'm not sure this has to do with the scoring, but I am interested in, especially as we consider the bond, how projects on the CIP get connected to recurring expenses in the general fund. I'm literally asking, just as a budget committee member, like I feel like it's our duty to ask what the budgetary impacts of some of these things are. So we talked about that 22-inch pipe under the Center Street Bridge, right? I can understand that once that gets replaced, it doesn't actually, it's just funded. And it's a piece of infrastructure that gets replaced, and it's operated the same way it was before, just at, I don't know, it's more stronger. But if we think about things like adding a navigation center, adding fire stations, adding things that aren't just a piece of infrastructure, but require some funding from, some ongoing funding. Is that considered as part of how CIP projects, or is that something that just the council chooses when they make the policy decision to go after that individual piece of improvement?
Excellent question. Two pieces. I think when you're talking capital projects and you're talking about the CIP and most likely the bond list, the operational costs or operational efficiencies are considered as part of the CIP score. For the bond committee, some of them are here tonight and they could speak to it more directly, but that was a consideration when picking different projects. For parks and streets, focusing on what we have and maintaining what we have was a big piece of that. But recognizing, there's need for fire stations, there's need, for example, there's some pre-development money for a library branch. We know we can't fund that with our current funding. But there's some pre-development money in there, for a mixed-use affordable housing library branch, most likely later in the bond, but it's still one of the recommendations that's going to go to council. So yeah, I hope that helps.
It does.
Remember, Tigan, you should come and watch us at our finance committee meetings. It's riveting, and we talk about this kind of stuff too. It's good.
Weirdly, YouTube suggests that I should be watching all these things, and I don't know. I'm not sure anyone else wants my algorithm.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right. This has been really good. And of course, if you have more questions, I'm sure we can email them to staff. But I will move ahead, seeing no other questions. May I have a motion recommending the proposed 2023 through 2027 capital improvements plan to the City Council for adoption?
Am I allowed to say so moved?
Yes, you are.
So moved.
Actually, I just made that executive decision. I don't know, but I think so. Okay.
Second.
Thank you so much, Member Varney. And I do have a small amendment. I don't want anybody to freak out here. But I would like to make an amendment to include projects 1 and 5 from the Parks 309 list and allocate staff time to investigating the possibility of a land acquisition at the fairgrounds location in Northeast Salem.
Second.
Thank you, Member Hoy. This is something that I've been working on with staff over the past month or so. It has really come to our attention that the area north of Market is really an area where those 1 and 5 from the 309 list. It's just a really high needs area for folks. There's a lot of people who live there and who don't have access to green space without crossing the 4 lanes of Market Street. And so this has already been identified on the 309 list, and that does have some system development charges allocated there. And I'm hoping that that could be enough for the staff time it would take to kind of investigate with the state fairgrounds folks to see if it's even possible for us to buy some land in the future, or maybe come up with a lease agreement for that property. So I'm hoping that you guys will agree with my needs that I'm stating here for Northeast Salem and vote in favor. Is there any other discussion? Member Hoy?
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. I can tell you that just last night at the Lansing Neighborhood Association, we were having this exact conversation about the need for more green space in that area. So this is, I know the neighborhoods are thinking about it and talking about it.
Thank you. Yeah, Mayor Bennett.
Just sit there. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Yeah, I think that's particularly your discussion, I think, of the state fairgrounds and talking with the state. I don't know about purchasing or getting a donation, however it would come. There was a park there for many, many years in that southern portion of the fairgrounds parking lot. And it'd be really interesting to see if that can be explored. So I think it's really appropriate to take and I think it's not going to take much staff time to find out from the State Fair board whether they're going to be at all interested in having a discussion on this. If that takes more than an hour, I'll be shocked. So I'll look forward to hearing about it, and hope the staff, as they look at it, will also include those of us who would like to advocate for it in the discussion.
Thank you so much. Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add my voice to the other enthusiasts. I think this is a terrific idea. We desperately need more green spaces in that area. We want all parts of our city to be accessible, family-friendly, walkable, and have this green space, I think, is something that's consistent with our priorities as a council. So I will be supporting the motion for sure.
Thank you so much. Is there any other discussion? Okay, well, on the amendment, we'll vote first on that. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying no. Okay, motion passes. Thank you all so much for that. The Northeast Salem really appreciates that investment. All right, so now we move on to our original motion with mine now included in that. Do we have any discussion about that as well? Okay, seeing none, All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. The motion passes. That's great. Thank you. Okay, we are now on to special orders of business. We have item 7 on the agenda. Our Chief Financial Officer, Eggleston, will now present 3 items to us: the Urban Renewal Agency proposed budget, the strong, and diverse economy service area, and the safe, reliable, and effective or efficient infrastructure service area. And due to the links between the Urban Renewal Agency proposed budget and the strong and diverse economy service budget area, questions for both will be taken at the conclusion of the strong and diverse economy section of the presentation. Okay, so who do we have that's up first? All right. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. Just 1 second. Because of the robust connection between the programs and projects promoted by the Salem Urban Renewal Agency and the city's activities support economic development, the Urban Renewal Agency budget and the results of strong and diverse economy will be reviewed together. There are 2 sections that make up the strong and diverse economy results area: the city funds and the Urban Renewal Agency funds. The city funds make up $13 million in proposed funding, and there are 30 full-time equivalent positions within this results area's programs. Salem's Urban Renewal Agency is a distinct corporation with the mayor and the city council serving as its board of directors and the city manager as executive director. City staff, primarily in the urban development department, support urban renewal programs through an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Salem. The 7 urban renewal areas are featured on this slide from north to south. They are North Gateway, formed in 1990 and is the largest at 926 acres. Riverfront Downtown is the oldest area, formed in 1975. West Salem, formed in 2001. South Waterfront was formed in 2007 and includes a portion of Minto Island. McGilchrist was formed in 2006. Fairview, formed in 1984 and is no longer collecting tax increment. And Mill Creek was formed in May of 2005. Also included but not pictured is the newest established Jory Apartment URA. The Tax Allocation Bond Fund or Debt Service Fund, beginning on page 13 of the Urban Renewal Agency book. So that's the smaller one for the 2 books that you received at the beginning of the process. This includes the tax increment revenues realized in each individual urban renewal area, and the expenditure budget for this fund is $20.7 million. The Tax Allocation Improvements Fund or Capital Improvements Fund, beginning on page 23, receives the proceeds realized from long-term or short-term borrowings, commonly called de jure borrowings, and the Debt Service Fund to fund improvement projects. The total expenditure budget proposed for fiscal year 2023 is $86 million. Details about projects in each urban renewal area are included in this section of the budget publication. And then also operational revenues and expenditures of the agency-owned Salem Convention Center are accounted for in the Convention Center Fund, beginning on page 57. Revenues are derived from food sales and meeting room and equipment rentals. The proposed fiscal year 2023 expenditure budget is $2.4 million. As the convention center opened, the Urban Renewal Agency also established a gain-loss reserve to help augment an operating shortfall or to fund repairs or capital improvements to the facility. A combination of transient occupancy tax funds and income from the convention center operations have been used to fulfill the $4 million goal for this reserve. Working capital to begin fiscal year 2023 is estimated at just over that $4 million mark, with a proposed operating budget of $840,000. As part of the organizational service realignment, the Parking Services Division has moved from the Urban Development Department to the Community Development Department for the fiscal year 2023 fiscal year. There's no budgetary impact to this change. It's just simply moving from one department to another. So that's why you see in Urban Development, you see 2022 with Parking Services, and you'll see blanks. But if you go to the Community Development section, you'll see blanks for 22, and you'll see it added for 23. Most of the work within the strong diverse economy results area is the continuing of services traditionally provided. However, there's some highlights to mention. The Urban Development Department continues its work on economic priorities outlined in the city's strategic plan. This includes work to support the community's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, supporting business retention and expansion of growth of BIPOC-owned businesses, and providing funding for microenterprise technical assistance programs. Fiscal year 2023 will also reflect the ongoing operation of the city's 3 parking structures. Despite the loss of revenue of parking rents paid by businesses due to the pandemic, the city remains committed to providing clean parkade for visitors to the downtown area. With that, staff are now available for questions on the strong and diverse economy results area and the urban renewal area. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I was getting handed my dinner. Thank you so much for that presentation. And since now I'm all flustered, are we taking questions now or are we moving on to our next?
Questions on the urban renewal agency and the strong and diverse economy results areas, and then we'll move to the safe and efficient infrastructure.
Okay, thank you for filling in my gaps. Counselor Nordyke, we'll just go with that.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Stapleton. And again, I'm starving over here. My apologies. That was not appropriate decorum. No one should do what I do. I don't know if this is the appropriate section of our agenda to bring this up, but I saw in our materials, the Downtown Advisory Board was making their pitch for a paid parking district. Is city staff, do we have a proposal buried in our several hundred pages of budgetary documents? Is the city staff proposing a paid parking district at this time or at any point during our budget talks this year?
Kristen Rutherford, Interim City Manager. We are not proposing it as a part of this budget cycle. It is an item that is identified within the Climate Action Plan. And as we kick that off and move forward with implementation of the action items within the Climate Action Plan, that is something that we look to be bringing back to the council later this year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, that was a good letter, and I know we've received that letter or one like it for several years now. And I know those businesses need all the help they can get right now, and so I look forward to being a part of that process as well. Member Cohen?
Unmute. Thank you, Chair. So this is kind of a 3-part question. The first is the City of Salem going to revise or revamp their small business website? And this is after me looking at City of Portland, City of Eugene, City of Seattle websites as far as information that local small businesses or business in general can use to find out more information about how the City of Salem works or some of the grants or loans that are available for them. And then off of that, I was wondering if we could go over if the city offers any kind of small business or veteran-owned business or BIPOC-owned business grants or loans or things of that nature to expand their businesses, what that amount is, and if there's any way to increase it. And the last thing, is if there's any thought of having a liaison between the City of Salem and local small business communities for people who are interested in trying to start or expand their business, but need to have some sort of, as I was going to say, liaison to work with city staff members about what proper contracts and other kind of documentation is necessary. Thank you.
It's a great question. Who can answer it?
I'll address this. Sorry, I was busy taking notes. I feel like I'm in a job interview, right? The 3-part question. So the first thing that you mentioned is a website, and we are currently undergoing a complete city website update right now. So you will be seeing changes just globally on the city website to make it easier to use and access information. Regarding the grants, we do have grant programs available within our urban renewal areas, but urban renewal can only be used for capital improvements. We have no grant programs that would go directly to businesses as funding, as capital to help you start a business. We can, within urban renewal areas, provide grants to do tenant improvements, to help with the purchase of equipment, that sort of thing. Again, those are isolated just to our urban renewal areas. There is no funding source to be able to do any other kind of assistance outside of urban renewal areas or with just general business capital needs. We do try to connect people through SEDCOR, through the SBA, to local banks to help access capital and get financial support through those avenues. Those grants are really tied more to access and availability to anybody who needs them that wants to make an investment within an urban renewal area. We've just completed an update to our economic development strategy tied to COVID recovery, where we have developed strategies to increase our engagement with our BIPOC community. And we also have an individual within the urban development department that is a business recruitment and retention expansion person who does outreach within our urban renewal areas where we have grant resources. Now, their skill set or their focus is not on helping businesses start up or helping you, a business owner, with the legal structure or how to start a business. That's not what they do. They really help people more to navigate through the city process, connect them with partners in the community. So, for example, if there was an individual interested in starting a business, while they couldn't help them with the formation of that business, they could connect them to other resources within the community that could assist with that.
Did that get all your answers that you needed, Member Cohen?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing what all the city is doing and has their hand in. I will do a quick plug here that the Downtown Advisory Committee has 3 openings on it right now. So if you are watching and are part of that community and want to be more involved, that is a great place to be. Vice Chair Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I'm going to follow Member Cohen's question, or questions, shall I say. And so I got a feeling that the city manager will have to answer this. But it's something that you just said, so I'm just going to throw this out there. So let's say someone that looked like me wanted to start a business. Your answer was that there is no one to help me start a business. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's not a service that we provide within the city. What we would do is connect an individual with other resources in the city.
And I think that's where I get lost. Mm-hmm. I get lost in the weeds because this is a conversation that I think this group and other groups we've had for quite a while now. Because if we're looking to attract more business owners, especially business owners of color, this is where the rubber does not meet the road. And this is where we get a lot of frustrated citizens within the city of Salem. And the reason I say that is because if we look on page 8, and I think this is in the words of Paul, in the big book, on page 8, the second bullet says, continuing efforts to support business retention and expansion and grow minority-owned businesses with targeted outreach efforts and align resources to meet their needs. You see, if we put that in writing, I struggle with that writing coming to fruition. And for me, that is a disconnect. And this is a conversation, I can recall us having before. And I've heard tonight, we have kind of used the word equity lens in a variety of places. And so again, I'm coming back to the same place as I was last year and the year before to say, if we're going to use that language of an equity lens, we need to see how that equity lens is being used within this big book. And I'm sitting here, I'm not exactly sure yet how an equity lens is being used. I know some good work is being done, yet at the same time, if we're looking at those marginalized communities and those marginalized voices that are not represented, I'm pretty confident that Councilor Gonzalez can speak on behalf of his own ward that we do need to make room for more of those BIPOC members to have a seat at the table. So that's more of a statement rather than a question, because again, I think we're still looking for input when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion for all of Salem citizens.
Thank you, guys. Oh, go ahead.
I could just respond to that briefly. I mean, your question was specifically about business startup, which is, as I mentioned, it's something that we don't engage directly in because we don't have financial resources to fund startup activities. We have financial resources to put into facilities because of the limitations of the urban renewal tool. Often the needs of a startup business, sometimes it's investment in a facility. We've had businesses in downtown, for example, 1850 Ninesider, when they came into the downtown area, they were a new business. We were able to provide a grant to the property owner to help build out that space for their business operations. So that is a way that we can engage with a new business and help them start up. We can't provide them counsel or advice on how to start up a business or business strategy, that sort of stuff. Our limitations are really towards the infrastructure investment and then facilitating connections with others that do specialize in those other areas. With recruitment or the retention and expansion piece, again, tied to our urban renewal areas, where we're talking about the engagement with the community and trying to be more inclusive. As an example, in our North Gateway urban renewal area, when we were revisiting a few years ago our project list there and developing our action plan, that approach tried to engage members of the community by doing things like partnering with key individuals within the community and holding meetings in homes where individuals would be more likely to come and engage in a different way with an interpreter there present than inviting people to City Hall. And then, working with members of the community, for example, the Kaiser that's there on Portland Road, to help meet their needs, to help them relocate from Albany to the Salem community. And while we couldn't connect them with, while we could connect them with the business resources that they may need, our direct involvement was then in the grant funding to help build the facility there. So it's not something that we can engage in at all levels because of the limits and restrictions of the funding sources that we have available. But we do try then to connect individuals with other resources to help fill that gap.
Vice Chair, did you want to respond at all?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up and talking about it in such a candid and straightforward way. It really helps me personally continuing, like DEI, right? It's a continual growth thing. And the minute we become stagnant, right? So I appreciate your push even on me as I learn to think about and see things differently. So thank you for that. Member Source?
Thank you, Chair. So my question is also about businesses here in Salem. And it's a kind of a couple part question, if that's okay, Madam Chair. But the first part is, do we have any kind of business licensing fee here in the city of Salem?
We do not.
So
sorry, I should clarify. We do have specific licenses for certain types of businesses, but there's no general license.
okay, thank you. So then, do we have any idea how many businesses we have in the city of Salem, or how many different kinds of businesses we have in the city of Salem?
We do not. We do not have a business registry.
Okay, so I guess my point of asking these questions is I grew up in a suburban town of 25,000 people. We had a business licensing fee in my community that I grew up in. Because of that, we knew how many different kinds of businesses we had by industry, how many were minority owned, how many were women owned, et cetera, et cetera. And because of that, we could provide specific services to those specific kinds of businesses. So I guess my question to city staff is, you know, if we wave a magic wand and now tomorrow we have a small business licensing fee, what kind of services would you like to provide to said businesses if A, you knew what kind of businesses we had in the community, and B, you knew what kind of businesses maybe need that little extra support or that little extra advice, and how could we help with that?
I really appreciate that question, you know, because one of the barriers that we have in providing services right now is the lack of information that we have about the businesses in our community. And that information we acquire largely through the land use process or through our own outreach. And it's a very incomplete data set. And that we have geographic constraints in our funding tools through urban renewal and limitations on the kinds of services we can provide using those funds. So if we were to have a business registry, that would give us a much better understanding of the business representation in our community. It would help us do targeted outreach within the business community, which is difficult to do now because, again, our staff within urban renewal are supported by the urban renewal area. So their activities are largely, not completely, but largely constrained to work within the urban renewal areas. So this would free up and add capacity to do more work outside of our urban renewal areas. And I think that there's also a great deal of need for grants to help with those startup activities, or to partner with other organizations that are more deeply engaged with the needs, the accounting needs, the legal needs, the sort of advice and service that businesses need to start up, that we don't have the technical expertise to provide.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I may ask one more question.
Sure.
Thank you. Is it true that just traditionally it's been council's kind of purview to refer all of that to, you know, the Salem Chamber of Commerce and those kind of organizations instead of having the city provide those services? They kind of defer it to more private organizations that have traditionally filled those roles. Is that kind of the idea of why we don't have those services here in the city?
I don't know that I can speak to whether or not that's a council decision to do that. I will say that it has been past practice, and it's been past practice largely because of skill set and funding resources.
Fair enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was really good discussion. Do we have a working relationship with the Schmeketa Small Business Center that's here? I mean, those are fantastic folks. Yes. That's who I went through for my small business.
And that's generally who we will help people partner with.
Yeah, fantastic program. Yeah, fantastic. And I do have member Vera Brandel. Oh, there you are. Okay, go ahead.
I have a bit of a broader question about urban renewal agency, urban renewal areas. I'm curious what the process is for identifying an urban renewal area, what sort of criteria we look for, if it's something that we do outreach for, or if we allow people to approach us to identify those areas.
So we have not created a new urban renewal area for several years. The process for that goes through the land use planning process. We identified, I think, 3 or 4 different areas when the city completed our strategic plan a few years ago. We convened a work group on economic development and urban renewal area where they looked at areas within the community that would be sort of next on the list for creating a new urban renewal area. We are limited by state statute on the amount of acreage in the city we can have within urban renewal areas. So we will need to eliminate or reduce acreage in an existing urban renewal area to free up capacity to do another large urban renewal area. So that would be sort of a first step in a process. And then we would be responding to a number of different factors in looking at a new urban renewal area. One would be where it would meet the various findings that are required by statute. Blight is one of those findings, where there's an economic need for infrastructure investment. So through this prior process, there were, again, 3 or 4 locations that were being considered. One was up on State Street out on Lancaster. The North Waterfront area was discussed. And along Mission Street, some areas there were discussed at that time. And at that point, we didn't do any future analysis because we don't have the acreage capacity. But as we have that acreage capacity, then we would, move forward through a public input process. There's also a lot of financial analysis that has to go into this process because of the way urban renewal works. It doesn't always work in every geographical area. You have to have a certain amount of opportunity for new investment for it to pencil. Because of the way that our property tax revenue is capped at the 3% growth a year, it can take a decade or 2 decades if you don't have a significant new investment coming in and adding to the tax rolls after the urban renewal area is created. So it can take, a very long time before you have money to do projects or to provide grants within an urban renewal area without that sort of catalytic investment. So there's a lot of different types of analysis, including identifying what infrastructure needs would be there, what kind of grant programs you might offer, all of these different things that then go through, probably a 2 to 3 year process to determine whether or not an urban renewal area will actually work in a geographic area. I think that we're getting closer to having those discussions about where we would do our next larger urban renewal area. At that point in time, so we'll finish up the comprehensive plan. And then I think that's going to provide some input as to where we would have need for a future urban renewal area. And then we will have to then start all of the analysis and the engagement with the community. Urban renewal is very, very complicated and wonky in terms of how it all works. So there's no short, easy answer to it.
Josh, did you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, the one other consideration is, so when you create a URA, it diverts tax revenue from taxing districts, and we're one of those taxing districts. So just as we balance the need for another URA, it's also balancing, hey, for the next however many years this is open, you're diverting that 3% growth or greater growth away from the general fund, away from the school district, away from the other taxing districts. So it really is a tension and a balance to get that correct. And we can certainly provide more information on URAs. We'll bring that back to you also, just so you can have that documentation.
Thank you. Member Nordyke?
Thank you so much, Chair Stapleton. I actually wanted to go back to member sources comments. As he was speaking, I started Googling, always a dangerous prospect. And actually, business license fees are a thing. I just happened to Google this and I found that Oregon City, for example, has an application on its website for a business license. And it is structured depending on how many employees you have. So basically, if you have 1 to 25 employees, you have the lowest rate possible. And after that, they have tiered steps. So 26 to 50, 51 to 100, et cetera. And they have increments. Basically, the more employees you have, the more your businessing licensing fee. So then I actually started Googling a little further, like, well, why on earth would we ever want one of those things? And as it turns out, the League of Oregon Cities actually has a model business license ordinance on its website, ready to go. I'm sure we would want to, consider how we would change it. But it talks about the fact that cities might want to use that businessing licensing fee as a way to secure the revenue to defray the cost of administering and enforcing our laws and ordinances on the books. Basically, any public safety calls for service, administering information that has to do with public health, safety, general welfare. Oh, I don't know, in case there's a pandemic or something like that, and you want to get information out to businesses immediately. Anecdotally, I can tell you that when the pandemic hit, we tried to get information out to businesses about PPE equipment and other grant opportunities that were available on a very short-term basis. There was not very much time to get the information out. And the dissemination of that information is imperfect because we don't have a simple button we can push to notify all of the businesses licensed in the area. This is the money we have available for grant opportunities, for CARES funding, for PPE, for other forms of reimbursing. And I think that information could be handy in other contexts too. For example, if there's a major protest planned and we're going to be shutting down city streets, that's the kind of information where it would be helpful to know all of the registered businesses, what's going on, what's happening, and also just to have that information available to our emergency responders. And I note that under the model business licensing ordinance that the League of Oregon Cities crafted for cities' consideration, they also recommend a licensing fee that is structured depending on the number of employees, right? We don't want small mom and pops to suffer because of a businessing licensing fee. We know that when you're starting a business, every dollar counts, right? Especially when you're just getting it going. So I think it's something worth looking into because it is a thing. There is a way to approach it from a best practice perspective. And there's a way to do it so that particularly our small mom and pops, our small businesses, our local businesses, I think there's a way that it could be done to be sensitive to those costs and increase our connectivity with our business community too, and perhaps offer greater services, especially to up-and-comers who would value the city's assistance. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting conversation. I'm not committed or wedded to this proposal at all, but I think it's worthy of exploration.
Thank you, Member Nordick. Member Cohen?
Yes, thank you again, Chair. Going off of what Councilor Nordick was talking about, I do know that the Secretary of State requires businesses to renew or to register their businesses. Is there a way that the city could just acquire or request that information from the Secretary of State in lieu of our own registry? Would be question one. Question two would be, how much does the registry cost, and can we do that? And the third would be, as a percentage of the entire overall budget, how much does the city of Salem put towards this strong, diverse economy? And it's more of a philosophical pontification, is that it's probably minimal. And because I'm pontificating, I'm going to just say it's not enough. And I feel like if we're going to support our small businesses, especially our BIPOC, veteran, women-owned businesses and encourage them to come to Salem. We need to spend more money there because when you spend it on the small businesses, it keeps those people engaged in our city, and it brings inevitably more taxes to us overall. And so that's my pontification on that. I don't expect an answer, and I know other folks will probably have things that they would rather spend their money on, but I do think that we should spend more money on that.
I can address the first part of your question, and then Josh, I think, could speak to the second part. Regarding the state's registry, I'm not aware that we can get that from them. We do get information about businesses within Salem from the state, but it's all aggregated and rolled up without specific, such and such business has so many employees. If we have our own business registry or business license, we can get that kind of information, which can also be of great value in being able to look at those numbers and seeing, oh, well, this business has added, 5 staff or 10 staff, or this business has reduced by 10 staff. So, what's going on here, and how can we reach out? How can we help them and provide support one way or the other for those that are struggling or those that are growing and expanding? But that's not information that we have been able to get through our state resources. And then Josh, I'll let you speak to the other part of that question.
Yeah, and just real quick on the state registry, it's just a corporation register, and doesn't explain the type of business or their physical address in a lot of cases. It could be a PO box. It could be in Salem, it could not be in Salem. So it's just to take that data and try to do something with it would be a real challenge. We did look at this a couple of years ago with the Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force. They did not recommend it as a revenue generating source, but identified it kind of as it could be a helpful thing to have in general, with somewhat of a minimal fee to administer the program kind of a thing, just to have that information. I think with a fairly minimal fee, it could pay for itself for the staff that it would take to administer the program.
Thank you. And I see Member Source will take your question, and then if everybody is okay, we'll move on to the last report for the night so that we can make sure that time is of the essence here.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would say that not much of a question, but just more of a statement. Although the Secretary of State's registry is technically required, they would be the first to tell you that there's a lot of people who don't follow the compliance. There's a strong compliance issue there. So just want to note that. And a second note, the business fee when I was growing up in my hometown of Westland was $25. We're not talking a massive undue burden to businesses. So that's all I wanted to say there. I'll get off my soapbox, and thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so we have one more result area that we're gonna look into now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm gonna share my screen. The safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure is the second results area we'll review this evening. The safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure begins on page 121 of the budget publications for the operating budget and page 189 for the construction budget. The results area has a total expenditure budget of $153.9 million, approximately 21% of the total citywide expenditures. The construction funds have a total budget of $231.6 million, representing an additional 32% of the total expenditure budget, and 289 full-time equivalent positions are included in this results area. There were several positions added to this results area to address increased demand or regulatory requirements that are listed here on the slide. Most of the positions were added to the utility fund. The one big difference there, away from the utility fund, is 4 that were moved to the new customer service center. It's going to be built here at City Hall. We talked a little bit about the Navigation Center. We're in the process of receiving grant funds from the state of Oregon and Marion County to provide upgrades to the former state-owned building on 22nd Street for a Navigation Center. Engineering project managers continue to manage the renovation of the building that will provide services for the unsheltered. The city hired an architectural firm to begin design for the renovated building, which will include new roof, HVAC upgrades, restroom, shower facilities, commercial kitchen, additional fire sprinklers, and other tenant improvements. Construction is expected to begin in spring or summer of 2022, but it really is dependent on those grant funds and then if there's any supply chain issues. In addition, transportation has several enhancements planned for this next fiscal year with pedestrian, intersection, street, and sidewalk improvements. Some projects include a median island and crossing with street lighting, ADA ramps, and a rectangular rapid flashing beacon at Lancaster Drive and Watson Avenue Northeast. Additionally, intersection improvements at Lone Oak Road and Reese Hill Road will include the design of a new intersection to accommodate pedestrian activity in South Salem. With that, staff are available for questions on a safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure results area. And I will say there's a lot of overlap here with the discussion during the CIP, so just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, we did talk a lot about infrastructure earlier, but are there any other questions that folks have now? And of course, staff are always available by email. I don't see anyone, and I do not have any questions. So I think we are ready to move on. Thank you so much for the presentation. It looks like our final item under for tonight is under special orders of business. And of course, that's the opportunity for a committee to continue an earlier discussion or introduce an issue or concern for the committee's consideration. Do we have any topics that we'd like to talk about now? Okay. Oh, Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. I just want to throw out some general information for the Budget Committee. Last year, we voted to approve $135,000 towards a mobile crisis unit. And I just wanted to update folks on where we as a council are at with that. So I'll try to make it short and sweet because we've been here a while and some of us haven't had dinner yet. So we approved 135 with the expectation of receiving matching funds from the state of Oregon under a bill that was still pending in the legislature. That bill changed dramatically. When we made that vote, it said that we could apply directly for that funding. When the bill was signed into law after Budget Committee meetings concluded, I believe the bill was signed in July of last year, that language was dropped from the bill. And instead it said the cities can request money from the county. Pretty big difference in our financial prospects for that allocation. So, long story short, we recently made a motion in a city council meeting to direct the city staff to draft a request for qualifications so that local partners, I'm not going to call them out by name, I don't want to put pressure on any of them, but we have some local nonprofits who I think would be a great fit to deliver some or all of this service. That request for qualifications is expected to drop May 2nd. And you have to provide enough time for them to participate and submit their request. That's going to take 60 days. So by the time our budget talks are done, we're probably not going to have an opportunity to talk about funding this project. But all of you are members of this committee, and I welcome your input even after the budget talks are over, because eventually we're going to get to a phase where the request for qualifications is done, then a request for proposals is done. And the request for proposals is where you invite the qualified groups to submit, okay, we're ready to run a mobile crisis unit. Here's how much it would cost for our group to run it. And so that'll be a decision that comes for council. And I confirmed with our interim city manager, I don't anticipate that we'll get that process to you, our budget committee, for this cycle. But you're members of the public. Some of you are my constituents. And if you're not my constituent, you're the mayor's constituent and the constituents for our chair and our other esteemed members of council. So I'm sure they will all want to hear from you. So that's why we don't have that in our budget right now. But this saga is far from over, and I will keep pushing for it. And I really appreciate the support from the other members of council who have voted unanimously, if I remember correctly, to support the request for qualifications and proposals. So to be continued, but I just wanted to close that loop for the time being. And if any of you would like to talk with me offline more about the process, I'm happy to do so. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to update us all on that project. Is there anybody else? Oh, Member Source.
So I think this is more of just a heads up to the city staff of a couple things I would love to get a little more information about before next meeting. And that's one around parking. I spent so much time talking about businesses. I didn't want to spend more time talking about parking. But the question around, since we've gotten new parking meters that have, thankfully, the ability to use a card instead of just coins, how much more are we getting out of our parking services? How many more people are paying to park in our areas, especially downtown? That would be super helpful just to share with people. And then my second question is going back to some of the infrastructure conversation. There's been a lot of conversation up in the Portland area about orphan highways. And some could argue we have a couple of those here in the city of Salem. And so a question around what does it take for the city of Salem to start the process of having that conversation with the state of Oregon about maybe taking over some of these roads that, as our city has grown, people are trying to cross, and the mission of ODOT getting cars to like across town is conflicting with people who want to cross the street, right? And ODOT maybe not, sorry, the Oregon Department of Transportation, maybe not doing its job from our perspective of supporting the city and protecting Oregonians who are using alternative modes of transportation. So I just love a little information about a process of how to identify these troubled roads and what city can do with the resources they have to do some research about working with ODOT to kind of take over some of those roads.
Thank you, Member Source. So the term orphaned roads, I've never heard that before. And maybe I'm alone on this, but I'm guessing it's the highways that are going through our cities that are owned and controlled by ODOT. And the idea would be to give that ownership back to the city so we can have more control over those spaces. Is that correct? Is that the idea?
That's traditionally what I'm talking about here. And I guess what I would paraphrase it is maybe not all ownership back to the city, but a better partnership of considering the needs of the city when it comes to some of our highways that cross through our community.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great. Vice Chair Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know we talked a little bit about this briefly, just about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I recall last year, we had a similar conversation in regards to our personnel, the people who are serving and working for the city. And we discussed, hiring practices and whatnot. Is there a way that we can get that data that we talked about last year about how many employees we have here in the city and their ethnicity? Is there a way that we can see that, Josh, or is that something for Krishna? I mean, she may be on the call. I'm just curious.
I believe she is on the call, but it's something we'll look into and we'll get back to you next week.
Okay, thank you so much. And the reason I only bring that up, I recall Mayor Bennett asking us, we are making some changes. And I remember one of the chiefs had said, it's not always easy to hire, people of color, people from the BIPOC community, because one, we know Oregon's history, and two, we understand that there are just not a lot of people of color who live in the state and the city. And so I'm just curious to see how far are we swinging toward that direction to make the city of Salem more attractive to a variety of families that are coming from BIPOC and other marginalized communities.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, and to hear about the good work that our DEI position is doing within the city to help with that would be really wonderful to get an update on. We hire these people and then, you step away and you move on to something else. It's always great to circle back. Member Phillips.
Thank you, Chair Stapleton. The number one issue that has been identified by the Community Satisfaction Survey for 3+ years in a row is homelessness and how we address that as a city. My question is, as a council, we've adopted or approved 3 potential sites for managed micro shelters at Center Street, Front Street, and on Turner Road. And right now, the budget is assuming that we will continue to operate with just 2 sites. So we'll transition one of the Portland Road sites eventually, hopefully, to the 12th Street. My question is, are there any barriers to expanding to like a 3rd or 4th site as we've approved as council that would need to be addressed through the budget committee?
No, I don't believe so. All the funds that we expect through state grants and other funding sources are appropriated within the budget, so that would be within the council's purview.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit long pause, and then I believe we don't have anyone else signed up for public comment. Josh, is correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and since I do not see anyone else with their hand raised, it looks like we are adjourned for the evening. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.
For more videos and for more information, go to capitalcommunitymedia.org and follow us on social media.